taken ill, after a night of riot, and sent by his boon companions with all expedition to St. Bartholomew's Hospital. I had watched this scene, for there was a gentleness about the poor woman that interested me. She now tottered away from the door, walking as well as she could down Holborn Hill, but her strength soon failed her. She leaned against a wall, and her head sunk on her bosom, while her pallid cheek became still more white. I went up to her and offered my services. She hardly looked up. "You can do me no good," she replied. "I must go to the hospital, if I do not die before I get there." There were still a few hackney coaches accustomed to stand about the streets, more truly from habit than for use. I put her in one of these, and entered with her that I might secure her entrance into the hospital. Our way was short, and she said little, except interrupted ejaculations of reproach that he had left her, exclamations on the unkindness of some of his friends, and hope that she would find him alive. There was a simple, natural earnestness about her that interested me in her fate, especially when she assured me that her husband was the best of men, had been so till want of business during these unhappy times had thrown him into bad company. "He could not bear to come home," she said, "only to see her children die. A man cannot have the patience a mother has with her own flesh and blood." We were set down at St. Bartholomew's, and entered the wretched precincts of the house of disease. The poor creature clung closer to me as she saw with what heartless haste they bore the dead from the wards, and took them into a room, whose half-open door displayed a number of corpses, horrible to behold by one unaccustomed to such scenes. We were directed to the ward where her husband had been first taken, and still was, the nurse said, if alive. My companion looked eagerly from one bed to the other, till at the end of the ward she espied, on a wretched bed, a squalid, haggard creature, writhing under the torture of disease. She rushed towards him, she embraced him, blessing God for his preservation. The enthusiasm that inspired her with a strange joy, blinded her to the horrors about her, but they were intolerably agonizing to me. The ward was filled with an effluvia that caused my heart to heave with painful qualms. The dead were carried out, and the sick brought in, with like indifference. Some were screaming with pain, others laughing from the influence of more terrible delirium. Some were attended by weeping, despairing relations, others called aloud with thrilling tenderness or reproach on the friends who had deserted them, while the nurses went from bed to bed, incarnate images of despair, neglect, and death. I gave gold to my luckless companion. I recommended her to the care of the attendants. I then hastened away, while the tormentor, the imagination, busied itself in picturing my own loved ones, stretched on such beds, attended thus. The country afforded no such mass of horrors. Solitary wretches died in the open fields, and I have found a survivor in a vacant village, contending at once with famine and disease, but the assembly of pestilence, the banqueting hall of death, was spread only in London. I rambled on, oppressed, distracted by painful emotions. Suddenly I found myself before Drury Lane Theatre. The play was Macbeth. The first actor of the age was there to exert his powers to drug with irreflection the auditors. Such a medicine I yearned for, so I entered. The theatre was tolerably well filled. Shakespeare, whose popularity was established by the approval of 4 centuries, had not lost his influence even at this dread period, but was still ut magus, the wizard to rule our hearts and govern our imaginations. I came in during the interval between the 3rd and 4th act. I looked round on the audience. The females were mostly of the lower classes, but the men were of all ranks, come hither to forget a while the protracted scenes of wretchedness which awaited them at their miserable homes. The curtain drew up, and the stage presented the scene of the witch's cave. The wildness and supernatural machinery of Macbeth was a pledge that it could contain little directly connected with our present circumstances. Great pains had been taken in the scenery to give a semblance of reality to the impossible. The extreme darkness of the stage, whose only light was received from the fire under the cauldron, joined to a kind of mist that floated about it, rendered the unearthly shapes of the witches obscure and shadowy. It was not 3 decrepit old hags that bent over their pot throwing in the grim ingredients of the magic charm, but forms frightful, unreal, and fanciful. The entrance of Hecate, and the wild music that followed, took us out of this world. The cavern shape the stage assumed, the beetling rocks, the glare of the fire, the misty shades that crossed the scene at times, the music in harmony with all witch-like fancies, permitted the imagination to revel without fear of contradiction or reproof from reason or the heart. The entrance of Macbeth did not destroy the illusion, for he was actuated by the same feelings that inspired us. And while the work of magic proceeded, we sympathized in his wonder and his daring, and gave ourselves up with our whole souls to the influence of scenic delusion. I felt the beneficial result of such excitement, in a renewal of those pleasing flights of fancy to which I had long been a stranger. The effect of this scene of incantation communicated a portion of its power to that which followed. We forgot that Malcolm and Macduff were mere human beings, acted upon by such simple passions as warmed our own breasts. By slow degrees, however, we were drawn to the real interest of the scene. A shudder like the swift passing of an electric shock ran through the house, when Rosse exclaimed, in answer to "Stand Scotland where it did," "Alas, poor country, almost afraid to know itself! It cannot be called our mother, but our grave, where nothing, but who knows nothing, is once seen to smile, where sighs and groans and shrieks that rent the air are made, not marked, where violent sorrow seems a modern ecstasy, the dead man's knell is there scarce asked, for who, and good men's lives expire before the flowers in their caps, dying or ere they sicken. Each word struck the sense as our life's passing bell. We feared to look at each other, but bent our gaze on the stage, as if our eyes could fall innocuous on that alone. The person who played the part of Rosse suddenly became aware of the dangerous ground he trod. He was an inferior actor, but truth now made him excellent. As he went on to announce to Macduff the slaughter of his family, he was afraid to speak, trembling from apprehension of a burst of grief from the audience, not from his fellow mime. Each word was drawn out with difficulty. Real anguish painted his features. His eyes were now lifted in sudden horror, now fixed in dread upon the ground. This shew of terror increased ours. We gasped with him, each neck was stretched out, each face changed with the actor's changes. At length, while Macduff, who, attending to his part, was unobservant of the high-wrought sympathy of the house, cried with well-acted passion, "All my pretty ones! Did you say all? Oh, hell-kite, all? What? All my pretty chickens and their dam at one fell swoop?" A pang of timeless grief wrenched every heart. A burst of despair was echoed from every lip. I had entered into the universe of feeling. I had been absorbed by the terrors of Rosse. I re-echoed the cry of Macduff, and then rushed out as from an hell of torture to find calm in the free air and silent street. Free the air was not, or the street silent. Oh, how I longed then for the dear soothings of maternal nature, as my wounded heart was still further stung by the roar of heartless merriment from the public house, by the sight of the drunkard reeling home, having lost the memory of what he would find there in oblivious debauch, and by the more appalling salutations of those melancholy beings to whom the name of home was a mockery. I ran on at my utmost speed until I found myself, I knew not how, close to Westminster Abbey, and was attracted by the deep and swelling tone of the organ. I entered with soothing awe the lighted chancel, and listened to the solemn religious chant, which spoke peace and hope to the unhappy. The notes, freighted with man's dearest prayers, re-echoed through the dim aisles, and the bleeding of the soul's wounds was staunched by heavenly balm. In spite of the misery I deprecated, and could not understand, in spite of the cold hearths of wide London, and the corpse-strewn fields of my native land, in spite of all the variety of agonizing emotions I had that evening experienced, I thought that in reply to our melodious adjurations, the Creator looked down in compassion and promise of relief. The awful peal of the heaven-winged music seemed fitting voice wherewith to commune with the Supreme. Calm was produced by its sound, and by the sight of many other human creatures offering up prayers and submission with me. A sentiment approaching happiness followed the total resignation of one's being to the guardianship of the world's ruler. Alas! with the failing of this solemn strain, the elevated spirit sank again to earth. Suddenly, one of the choristers died. He was lifted from his desk, the vaults below were hastily opened. He was consigned with a few muttered prayers to the darksome cavern, abode of thousands who had gone before, now wide, yawning to receive even all who fulfilled the funeral rite.